Here's my first Kusarigama training video that I've made since acquiring the antique I showed in my last video on the subject. And yeah, it's been a really fun quarantine time project. It's also a dangerous one. You can really hurt yourself with this thing. So here's my training version that I made. And I'm just doing an infinity pattern, right? Downward oriented, then an overhead. And again, this is the training one, so it's easier to see in the air and it's safe, but I will move on to the metal one. I'm holding the kama in my right hand, my dominant hand, and the rope, which would normally be a chain, although rope was used as well, is coming out of the pinky side of my hand. Seems like the more traditional Japanese grip, although either can be used and I'm trying to learn both. Now we're whipping around a piece of metal instead of a safe knot of rope. Striking the ground, seeing how it bounces back towards me, keeping it moving after striking the ground. You see that? That to me is a big deal. There's a lot of techniques online, with, swing, entangle their sword, and now you do an awesome Mortal Kombat finishing move. Okay, well, what if you miss? And also, how do you strike out in a way they don't expect? So here, do a double spin and then a downward strike. Might not seem like a big deal, but the thing is, their eye, from tracking the normal infinity pattern, expected, in theory, the weapon to cross back over, and by the time they visually catch up and realize it's still spinning back on my right side, it's now coming down at them. Here's a traditional Japanese starting position and strike that I like. Pretty ingenious. You whip the weight behind you, like around your back, and get it going for a full range swing. And yeah, that's the coolest way to swing the weapon, the maximum reach mode, but you have to figure out what you're going to do after. So this time I'm just going to drop it on the floor so I can copy a technique I found online. And that was on Thran's channel. He has 50,000 subscribers, so if you look at a lot of weapon stuff, you probably already know who he is. But anyway, pretty neat. You can just whip it right off the ground. Meanwhile, there was something I came up with on my own in just these initial experiments. How to kind of reset after that big max length one-handed swing. So I'll show you that in detail in a minute. First though, the easiest move to learn is this straight shot. So you go underhand, let it out, and the trick is to reel it back in with the other hand. And this one here is pretty mediocre. This one's better. And this move is pretty low on power by its nature. It's not just me being new to this either. I once watched one of those science-y martial arts shows on TV, and they had a kung fu master with a rope dart, meteor ball, meteor hammer type weapon, basically, a kusari fundo in Chinese terms. And the power that they measured with that same type of shot was not impressive. And in fact, I don't think I've seen one Japanese demonstration that uses it, but you want to be able to strike from every angle, of course, so I think it's a good move to have. And it seems to me with the Kusarigama, you want to be as unpredictable as possible, doing an upwards kind of reverse infinity pattern here. And I know you could say that about every weapon, you don't want to be predictable, but especially because of the whirling, you're having to keep momentum in this thing the entire time when fighting with it like this. I'll show other ways in later videos. But yeah, if you're moving this thing all around you in different ways, you want to be able to strike out from basically any one position. And this is just a placeholder picture, see my training version in the air. Here's a traditional combination I saw in some pretty old footage. Toss the weight out and instantly go into this very high over your head arc. You are really maximizing your reach and looking for the opportunity to strike down and either hit them or, of course, ensnare their weapon. Usually the latter. So while popular for many centuries, there's a reason this was never as common as other weapons, and that's because it's just difficult to use and it's easy to hurt yourself. And yes, I learned that personally, which I knew I would at some point, but even in just a couple of training sessions, as soon as you start feeling confident with this thing is when it's going to remind you how dangerous it is. So there was a new kind of strike, another traditional one I'm going to show you, with that downward backhand. You flick it straight out. So it's kind of a surprise. It's a change in trajectory. It looks like it's going to come in like an overhand right in MMA or boxing terms, and instead it's more of a jab. So a very clever attack. Here it is from the side. And one more. Now, as I said, the big swings are the most fun, but I was curious, how do you recover from a miss? So let's say that's an attempted strike right there. It doesn't work out. I can put distance between myself and the opponent while reestablishing some offense with the chain. So you're keeping all of its momentum after the miss. And here it is at full speed. You'll see the chain gets going pretty quickly right there. as soon as I'm done turning around. So that was my own little invention, and here's an alternate I did without turning my back. Because it seems to me in traditional combat, going up against a sword or a spear, katana or yari or a naginata, your opponent's chance is going to be to charge after a miss. Finally, it's worth noting how exceptional the length of this weapon is. The length on the rope here is about the same as a typical bow, but then you have the actual shaft of the kama, and then you have the fact that you can extend out like this. If you think about it, you'd actually never strike out with a bow or a yari or anything like that in this manner, so it's kind of this extremely long-distance melee weapon. Look at the circumference there in that picture. Or here, that weight is like 7 feet above my head, so just how often in weapons training is that even the case where the end of your melee weapon is that far from you? Especially with a swinging motion, you don't grab the end of your naginata or whatever at the very butt end and then swing it around. Anyway, that is round 1 of my experimentation on my quarantine quest to become adept at this most unusual weapon. Thanks.